of God and country. From the privateers of Francis Drake to the buccaneers of Henry Morgan, they were sea wolves hunting prey for Mother England.
Boston Harbor, a century before the American Revolution, is filled with ships from the great English trading companies. Sailors with coarse faces and heathen eyes make the devout New Englanders quicken their steps. A teenage country boy named Samuel Perkins visits his uncle, Elisha Skilling, a bosun on a small sloop called the Resolution. It is 1693. Elisha, happy to see his nephew, fills the lad's cup with grog. Samuel tries to keep up, though he's rarely tasted liquor in his devout New England home. The crew watches from a distance, dour, disgruntled, menacing. Uncle Elisha says to ignore them. They're just a little tired from the long voyage home. They're actually a very solemn, righteous group. He offers Samuel a tour of the ship and takes him straight to a quiet place, where, says Elisha, the crew meditates and prays.
All of a sudden, everything went black, and I found myself in the filthy hold. My head throbbing with grog, I asked myself again and again, how could my uncle betray me?
In those days, ships were always in need of fresh hands. Pirates needed more men than most. Sheer numbers made them dangerous. As for me, well, I was lured by the sound of music and laughter, drifting across a moonlit bay, from a ship of buccaneers. Dampier's the name. For 12 long years I sailed with the brethren. Why? Wanderlust, adventure, curiosity. I hope in time you'll come to forgive me.
Poor Sam Perkins is finally allowed on deck, just in time to watch the only home he's ever known sink below the horizon. For this trusting young man has been shanghaied on a pirate ship.
This was a journey to hell, a terrifying life with terrible men, men with whom I had nothing in common, not even a language.
If you were signed aboard a pirate ship, or any ship, in the 17th, 18th century, any sailing ship at all, you lived amongst a press of men who were all packed inside a space that was not adequate for a pair of dogs. Everybody sleeping in a hammock. No shower facilities. Your average dinner consisted of salt pork, a piece of pig that had been saturated in a saline solution so dense that it had to be boiled for an hour before you could even eat it. Your sanitary facilities were located forward at the head rails, where you had a direct communication with the ocean. According to Sam Johnson, any man who would go to sea for pleasure would go to hell for a pastime.
Right up there, man. That's the spirit.
Samuel Perkins learned the seagoing language and everything else he needed to survive. And he left a detailed account of his experiences at the hands of the pirates.
Hands to the braces.
The Resolution sailed with me aboard from New England to Africa. The work was hard, grueling. Hauling lines, climbing ratlins, manning the windlass. And these godless men talked about nothing but the fortunes that waited for them in the East.
The Orient, with its mysterious ways, its exotic jewels, amazing art, and spices, has long enchanted the Westerner. In the late 1600s, the English, Dutch, and Portuguese trading companies battle for the control of trade in the East. They raid each other's ships and factories. The English East India Company is one of the most aggressive of them all.
With the blessing and, yes, the encouragement of King Charles, the East India Company became one of the most brutal and ruthless forces in the East Indies. They were given authority to acquire territory, build forts, create armies, make alliances, and even go to war. They sat as sole judge and jury in criminal affairs. This was not just a monopoly for the peoples of the East Indies, it was the monopoly from hell. And in its name, thousands of them would lose their lives.
In such a hostile world, the call goes out to English privateers. They are commissioned by King Charles II to raid the ships of rival trading companies. With the help of outlaws, the English would build the mightiest Western empire since Rome, the British Empire. The pirates of Samuel Perkins' ship don't wait for a commission from the king to join their fellow predators in the East.
The scoundrels took a small merchantman with 12 cannons, but she was only carrying dates and rice. The crew was heartily disappointed.
With supplies and luck running low, Perkins' ship set sail for the one safe haven known to all pirates, the island of Madagascar, off the east coast of Africa.
We met Captain Hoare, an Irish pirate. When he laughed, you could hear him clear across the bay. He was in hiding, having robbed a large ship that belonged to the Mogul of India himself.
Imagine, you're a pirate, looking for the ideal hideaway. Well, you want somewhere with sweet water, sweet fruit, and even sweeter women. And you'd need somewhere where you can do some trading. You can't eat all that stolen gold and silver. You need to turn that loot into food and rum. Then too, you want somewhere close to your work, doesn't everyone? For a pirate, that'd be a place near the eastern seas, filled with treasure-laden ships. Madagascar, no place like home.
As night falls, the men of Perkins' ship celebrate ashore. They mix with the native women, who tolerate their coarse ways, and feast on native foods like mangoes and sea turtle soup.
And it was all washed down with the pirate's favorite brew, Blow Me Down. 2 parts rum, 2 parts gin, and a good dose of gunpowder. Guaranteed to produce a hangover the size of Madagascar.
Even in such intoxicating circumstances, Sam Perkins thinks only of escape. And so the next morning, while the pirates are recovering from too much blow-me-down, Sam Perkins slips away. He makes it to the island's trading fort, run by a wily sea dog named Adam Baldridge. Baldridge once killed a man in Jamaica, then escaped to Madagascar aboard a pirate ship. The fort is a busy trading center for pirates, natives, and Yankee traders. Baldridge gives Sam Perkins refuge in the fort. Alas, his freedom is short-lived. While Baldridge is away, there's an uprising of natives cheated by some pirates.
The fort was destroyed and they killed 7 Englishmen and 4 Frenchmen in the house where I was staying. By some miracle of this cursed life of mine, they spared only myself.
The natives spare his life, but not his freedom. Sam is sold to another pirate ship for a case of gunpowder.
And so I found myself once again at sea in yet another stinking pirate ship.
The ship makes its way toward the American colonies, always a ready market for stolen goods.
Even though we were bound for home, I couldn't stomach another 6 months of their cruelty. And so when we put in at St. Helena, I jumped ship.
An English supply station, St. Helena, is the most remote island in the South Atlantic. For 8 long days, Perkins hides in the craggy outcrops. The angry sea dogs scour the island looking for him.
If I were found by those villains, they'd kill me for sure, to set an example for the rest of the crew.
But Samuel's will is strong. He outlasts the pirates and watches them set sail. In time, an English merchant ship docks at the island, and Sam tells them his plight. The captain agrees to bring him along to England. On August 25, 1698, Samuel Perkins files a deposition with the English Admiralty, documenting his 5-year odyssey. He tells them of the scores of pirate ships in the eastern seas and how he watched their numbers grow.
Amazingly, the Admiralty did nothing at first. Perhaps they were thinking that Perkins had been exaggerating his adventures. Surely the young man had been through a terrible ordeal. He certainly had deserved safe passage home. But his stories must have seemed fantastic to the Navy men.
If they had listened, they might have understood that their trade wars were about to create a dangerous storm. As Samuel Perkins sails home to Massachusetts, a terrible age of piracy is about to begin. It will be led by men driven to legendary excess, men like Thomas Tew, Long Ben Avery, and the notorious Captain Kidd. And this time, no one will be safe.
Of all the pirates that lived and died in the eastern seas, none was more famous in his lifetime than Henry Every. He was the arch pirate, the pirate king.
It is night on a merchant ship anchored off the coast of Spain. The first mate, Henry Avery, instigates a mutiny. The men who haven't been paid are all for it. Avery gets the captain, an alcoholic named Gibson, very drunk. When the captain passes out, Avery sets sail. Henry Avery gives his ship a new name, Fancy, and hoists a new flag to show the world she is now a pirate ship. Henry Long Ben Avery crosses the strict lines of the English class system to prove that no one but he is master of his own destiny. Like Jesse James, he offers the downtrodden a hero. But is he a hero? In 1653, Henry Avery is born in Plymouth, England, to a family of landowners. At the age of 10, his world is destroyed when his parents die. His uncle apprentices him to a brutal shipmaster. But Henry is bright and tenacious. He teaches himself to read and write. Eventually, he becomes a navigator. It takes iron men to sail the wooden ships of the English trading companies. Not many survive a 2 or 3 year voyage. If the sailor doesn't work almost all of his waking hours, he'll soon feel the sting of the cat of nine tails.
Brace them in, friends. Brace them up there.
He lives crowded together in the dark, stinking place below decks. As for the food, a shipwright's.
Many are not used to such a sea diet, namely bacon as salty as brine, half-boiled grey peas, rancid porridge, and stinking water. Our ship has become a mere hospital, so they fall sick.
The ship's biscuit, which the weevils, which is some sort of insect, which I don't think I've ever seen, but it's a very famous insect, while you were eating your old boots beef, you had to tap the biscuit on the table, the mess table, to make sure that the bugs crawled out before you got round to it. And rats were a great delicacy. They used to say in the Navy that the rat which had a run of the bread room was as good as chicken, and they often went for quite large sums of money. You know, threepence for a rat was pretty good going.
Of course, the captain and passengers eat quite well in the stern cabin, far from the crew's forecastle and its stench.
What kept the men alive was grog. Nothing more than rum and water, and the sailors were required to drink it. The company felt it gave them energy. Most grew to like it, though. It clouded their memories, allowed them to forget that 1 out of 3 who shipped out would not make it home.
But Henry Longben Avery intends to beat those odds.
I am bound to Madagascar with the design of making my own fortune and that of all the brave fellows joined with me.
When Avery reaches Madagascar, he leaves a letter with a native chief to be delivered to the first English ship that comes in.
To all English commanders, I was here in the ship Fancy, formerly the Charles, a ship of 150 men bound to seek our fortunes. I have never as yet wronged any English, nor never intend whilst I am commander. But my men are hungry, stout, and resolute, and should they exceed my desire, I cannot help myself. As yet an Englishman's friend, Henry Avery.
That was the first, last, and only letter from Henry Avery. But it was enough. The East India Company now knows that there's a powerful new pirate on the prowl. Clearly, the letter was a ruse.
On his way north, Avery comes across 2 pirate sloops and persuades them to join him.
Jolly Rouge, pretty red the French called it. Jolly Roger, said we. The skull and crossbones came later, for that was the mark that the ship's captain made in a log when there was a death aboard. And so it came to mean surrender or die. But every pirate had his own handmade banner. Skeletons, arrows, cutlasses, bleeding hearts, or an hourglass. The hourglass to show their prey that time was running out.
In 1695, the Fancy and the sloops arrive in the Red Sea, on the heels of the Indian Mogul's fleet. Avery chases the Gunsway, a ship that has fallen behind.
The Gunsway was the largest ship in the Mogul's fleet, and when John Avery came on her, she was carrying about 500,000 gold pieces, a ruby-studded saddle, which was intended for the Mogul himself, and about 600 passengers, many of them who were very high officials in the Mogul's court, piously returning from their pilgrimage to Mecca.
There are also many women on board. Ladies of the court, concubines, slave girls. Avery sends the sloops in first. As the pirates board the gunsway, Avery closes in. The Indian captain rushes below deck where the women have hidden, desperate to protect them from the heathen pirates. He orders them to dress like men, but the pirates strip everyone to reveal their valuables. Men are butchered and tossed to the sharks. The women, those who don't commit suicide first, are raped.
When the pillage was over, the pirates set the gunsway loose, but kept many of the women aboard the Fancy, and they set their course for the Caribbean. It was a long crossing, and they grew tired, the women. So, one by one, they tossed them into the sea, leaving the pirates one more dark memory to forget.
Avery convinces the pirates of the other sloops that their loot would be safer on his ship. That night, after they move the loot, Avery slips away. When news of Avery's brutal sacking of the gunsway reaches India, the Mogul is outraged. Angry Indian crowds attack the homes of English residents. The Mogul's troops surround the East India Company's factory in Bombay.
They clapped all our people in irons, shut them up in a room, planked up all their windows, kept strict watches on them.
One of the East India Company's agents was stoned, others were sent in jail, and money and goods were confiscated, and the Mogul said that unless the English crown actually acted to protect his ships, there would be no more trade with the East India Company.
Far away from the riots in India, Henry Avery arrives in the Bahamas.
And he speaks to the governor of the Bahamas, who welcomes him with open arms, and he actually bribes him. And he bribes him with £1,000 worth of elephant tusks and sells him his ship, which is fine, but unfortunately the governor of the Bahamas doesn't have the authority to give him a pardon, which is what he actually wants, so he has to apply to the governor of Jamaica for that, which he subsequently does.
They have sent word to prevail with me to pardon them and let them come hither. I was told that it should be worth to me £24,000, a great sum, but that could not tempt me from my duty.
The English government puts a reward of £500 on Avery's head, and even though the East India Company had encouraged piracy in their trade wars, they double the reward. Avery is stunned that he's a hunted man. After all, it was only a heathen ship he plundered. Depressed and probably drunk, he lets the Fancy drift aground on a reef.
We know exactly what happened to Henry Avery's crew because it's all in the documentation. A lot of them went to America and landed on the shore there. Some simply disappeared quietly into the undergrowth, as it were. One man who'd won an amazing jewel as part of his loot promptly lost it in gambling and went mad as a result. He was so upset by it. Another one we happen to know got eaten by a shark, so that was the end of him. The rest of Avery's crew went to Ireland, and they landed, and they went ashore, and they got blind drunk, and they boasted about all the money that they'd got. And the people of Westport, the little village there, were rather astonished that this small sloop had come into the harbour and was entirely filled with nothing except silver and gold. So they gave themselves away completely and were duly arrested.
24 of Avery's men are captured, 6 are hanged, and the rest serve as convict laborers. No one knows what really happened to Long Ben Avery. Some say that when he died, there was not even enough money to pay for a coffin. It seems the jewelers who fenced his diamonds blackmailed him into poverty. We do know that Henry Avery was never caught. There were reports of him sighted everywhere, from temples in Tibet to cafes in Paris. That's the stuff of which legends are made. Here in northern Scotland, the son of a minister first hears the call of the sea. For him, it's stronger than the call of the Lord, and he leaves to become a sailor. His name is William Kidd. For years, he works the Caribbean as a privateer in England's war against France. Kidd's commander says he fought as well as any man he'd ever seen. Kidd marries a wealthy young widow and has 2 daughters. As one counselor put it,
"On the whole, he is a gentlemanly and clever man. Neither in his domestic relations nor his personal history could aught be said against him."
If considered as the instrument of this peace.
Every Sunday, Kidd can be found in Trinity Church with his wife and daughters. At 50 years old, he owns a fine house on New York's Pearl Street, and he has friends in high places, as he likes to describe them. In the midst of his good fortune, Kidd does something hard to explain. He risks everything for one last pass at even greater fortune on the sea.
Why does a man who has everything go back to sea? To a wild and dangerous world where even survival is uncertain. Perhaps the answer lies in the nature of the sea itself. Mysterious, profound. And I know well what William Kidd must have felt, trapped in that world of politics and society. How shallow, frivolous, and meaningless it all must have seemed.
In 1695, he leaves his mansion and his family and sails to England. Armed with letters of support from his eminent colonial friends to the British Secretary of War himself, Kidd seeks a commission as a privateer. He looks up old acquaintances from New York, Robert Livingston and Lord Bellomont, both shrewd opportunists.
Between them, they would come up with an idea so extraordinary they would blame one another for it the rest of their lives. Bellomont would help Kidd obtain a privateering commission, but it would be a commission to capture pirate ships. It was a win-win situation. The East India Company and the King would get rid of some bothersome pirates. Kidd, Livingston, Bellomont, and their aristocratic investors would make their profits now from captured pirate booty.
King William grants Kidd his commission. After all, there's 10% in it for him.
To our trusty and well-beloved Captain Kidd, now know ye that we do hereby give and grant the said William Kidd a commission as a private man of war with full power and authority to apprehend, seize, and take into your custody all such pirates, freebooters, and sea rovers.
Well, Kidd's new ship was called the Adventure Galley. She wasn't a rowing galley, but that was her name, and he chose her with a great deal of care. But after that, things began to go wrong, because proceeding to sea, the King's privateer failed to salute a Royal Naval ship which he passed, and in return to the Navy's salute, his crew came back with one of their own.
The Navy boards his ship and punishes Kidd by seizing half his well-chosen crew. He is forced to replace the men with whomever he can find around the docks. Kidd ends up with a bunch of hardcore troublemakers.
So, William Kidd is at sea at last. But at what price? The King and his aristocratic partners have made him sign a contract. If the mission failed, Kidd would owe all expenses. But at least he would enjoy the crossing. And the wheels kick and the wind's song and the white sails are shaking, and a grey mist on the sea's face and a grey dawn a breaking.
A long year passes. The adventure galley is becalmed under the scorching sun of the eastern seas, and Kidd has not captured a single pirate ship. His ship leaks, and he has lost a third of his crew to disease. When some try to escape, he shackles them and has them whipped. And still there is no plunder. If he returns to England empty-handed, he'll be in debt for life. There seems no choice. The pirate hunter will become a pirate. It was a myth that pirates were always caught and hanged. Truth is, they mostly got away with it. For more than 100 years, privateering is accepted as the law of the seas. When privateers slip into pure pirating, it's more profitable for their government to look the other way. He attacks a series of small Indian trading boats, but the take is pitiful. A few cases of pepper, a sack of coffee, and candy, tubs of candy. Tension between captain and crew visibly mounts. If Kidd doesn't find some booty soon, he may never make it home. On January 30, 1698, a ripe, juicy apple falls from the sky in the form of the Quetta Merchant, an Indian cargo ship. The taking of a rich ship like the Quetta could never be kept secret. But William Kidd will use an old privateering trick to make it seem legal.
The pirates were not the only masters of deception. Merchant ships carried passes from many nations, so they could pretend to be on whoever's side was the most convenient. If you were a privateer, the trick was to get the merchant ship to display the pass of your enemy. Kidd's commission allowed him to attack the ships of France. So what flag did Kidd fly? A French one, of course. So he could trick his prey into giving him a French pass. Now he could rob them legally.
The Quetta pays off in silks, sugar, guns, and gold, probably worth 7,000 to 8,000 pounds. Now, all pretense of pirate hunting is cast aside. Kidd takes 2 small merchant ships and pursues an East Indian trader. Kidd knows he's crossed the line and may have to answer for it. But he'll blame his mutinous crew for every illegal action committed, and he'll bring back enough booty to ensure his pardon. In Madagascar, he receives a letter from one of his investors, Robert Livingston.
Use your utmost endeavors to make a speedy return, where you may be assured to meet with a hearty welcome and a friendship to support you against all the mischances of your voyage.
While Kidd plows steadily homeward under favorable skies, a storm is brewing in India. For the Quetta Merchant was no ordinary vessel. It was actually owned by members of the emperor's own court. Once again, unruly mobs storm the company's factory. The Mogul demands compensation and revenge. All English trade is stopped. This catapults the company into taking action. They send home to England their file on Captain Kidd, demanding that he be captured. Merchantmen, politicians, the crown are all now united. The world must be made safe from piracy.
The rules of the game have suddenly changed, and no one has told Captain Kidd. As Kidd heads home, a warrant for his arrest is issued throughout the colonies.
Take particular care in apprehending said Kidd, it being their Excellencies' intentions that he be prosecuted with the utmost rigor of the law.
For William Kidd, it is the beginning of the end. At long last, Captain William Kidd sights New York. He avoids the city and meets his wife and children on Long Island. For months, Sarah Kidd has faced public condemnation of her husband. Kidd believes the French passes will prove he only pirated England's enemies. He sends them to his benefactor, Lord Bellomont. To ensure his loyalty, Kidd spreads rumors that he has buried huge bags of gold somewhere on the Atlantic coast.
I never knew a pirate to bury his treasure. Why throw your loot into a hole and cover it with dirt? There's a whole world of barkeeps and barmaids just dying to help you spend it. Nope, I think the only thing William Kidd buried was his dreams.
Perhaps Bellomont heard the rumors. In any case, he answers quickly.
Captain Kidd, Mr. Emma delivered to me 2 French passes, and I am apt to believe they will justify you. I make no manner of doubt but to obtain the king's pardon for you. On my word of honor, Bellomont.
Bellomont invites Kidd to present his case before the council in Boston. But this could be a trap. He's still a free man. Should he trust Bellomont or flee? He sends an expensive gift to Bellomont's wife and a letter to Bellomont, agreeing to come to Boston. Still, he fears he may never see his family again. On the evening of July 7, 1699, as he enters Bellomont's quarters, an officer grabs him. Kidd rushes inside, shouting Bellomont's name, but he is dragged screaming to jail. Bellomont turns his back on him.
There was never a greater liar or thief in the world than this Kidd.
Soon, Kidd's ship is found and seized. The remainder of his loot is also confiscated. For a while, Bellomont even puts Mrs. Kidd in jail and confiscates her household possessions.
The English are so determined to convict Kidd that the Lord Admiralty sends a ship to bring him to England for trial. As they take his plunder as evidence, Kidd prays they also have the French passes. In London, he's thrown into notorious Newgate prison. For 500 years, the lice, the rats, and stench have tortured the men doomed to live there. People cross the street to avoid it. Kidd's jailer writes,
Captain Kidd was troubled with a great pain in his head and shaken in his limbs.
In this dark hole, William Kidd will suffer for 2 years. Finally, he is paraded in front of Parliament.
The members don't listen to him. It's a circus. Each one vies with the other in an opportunity to condemn Kidd and piracy. His remarks aren't even recorded.
No one, not even his own investors, speaks up for William Kidd. On the way back to Newgate, Kidd's guard stops at a tavern and allows his prisoner a drink and a moment of peace. Kidd can only hope he's treated with as much humanity at his trial.
Kidd thought he had a good chance of getting off, because up till that date, many pirates had in fact been pardoned, and not that many had been hanged. One of the problems was at that date that if you were on trial, you had to conduct your own defense, which for Kidd, who'd been in jail for 2 years or something, was pretty tough.
My lord, I took no ships but such as had French passes for my justification, in confidence that they would be allowed for my defence. I surrendered myself to Lord Bellamont when I could have secured myself in several parts of the world. Some great men would have me to die to pacify the Mogul for injuries done by other men. But my lord, let me have the passes.
But the passes have mysteriously disappeared. Bellamont, who could have testified to the presence of the passes, could no longer do so because he's dead. Eventually, 200 years later, the passes would turn up in the Public Record Office in London. Even if Kidd had been able to produce the French passes, it would not have affected the outcome. One historian has said that William Kidd had to die so that India could be saved for the British Empire. The forces of order needed a scapegoat.
The clerk reads the sentence.
Death by hanging.
No!
My lord, it is a very hard sentence. I'm the innocentest person of all.
May 23, 1701. For 2 hours, Kidd is marched past the hooting and shouting crowds. Someone slips him a generous bottle of whiskey. By the time William Kidd steps to the gallows, he's quite drunk. As the hangman prepares the noose, the chaplain stands by to hear Kidd's final words of repentance.
A good hanging was great theatre, and it was the final speech that stirred the crowd. Most about to be hanged would spout some pious prattle, regrets for a sinful life, pleas for forgiveness, but not William Kidd. He refused to utter a word. Perhaps he knew the last words of pirates were much in demand. They were printed and sold for tidy sums, and William Kidd had already given enough in the name of profit.
His body is tarred for preservation and hung from a gibbet on the banks of the Thames. Some say it hung there for years. The death of Captain Kidd marked the turning point for the pirates. Some 20 years later, piracy all but disappeared, as the Admiralty, spurred on by the trading companies, hunted the villains down. As for Kidd, he paid the price for safer seas. He went down fighting and left a legend that's lasted for 300 years. "20 miles south of London is the National Maritime Museum. Here, the history of more than 3 centuries of Britain's seaborne empire is celebrated. It's a virtual treasure chest of pirate lore. Much of it dates from the early 18th century, the twilight years, when the hunters became the hunted. Here are pistols like those Blackbeard might have fired in his last desperate raid, the glinting sword Black Bart might have wielded as he drew his final breath. But here too hangs an elegant family portrait, a curious find among the relics of cutthroats. Yet this stately gentleman was the bravest pirate hunter in history. For 3 centuries, his family raided the ships of England's enemies. Now, war with France and Spain has called a new generation. And with a deep sense of duty, Woodes Rogers has answered the call. His destination, the Pacific Ocean to raid the Spanish galleons that sail from Manila. For any sailor, this would be a dangerous voyage. But for Woodes Rogers, it is more, for this is his first command. For 11 months, the men raid the west coast of South America, following the route of Francis Drake a century and a half before. On New Year's Eve, 1710, they sight a Spanish ship. Rich with treasure from the far Pacific, it is a Manila galleon. This is what Woodes Rogers has come for.
We got close aboard, plying our small arms very quickly, which our enemy returned as thick for a time, but did not fire their guns half as fast as we did.
Finally, the treasure ship surrenders. Rogers heads west, the long way home.
Well, the big problem always on a boat is knowing exactly where you are. This is measured in longitude, which is how far east or west you are from the Greenwich meridian, and how far north and south you are. Looking at the world like that, the equator running around it this way, as you can measure on the surface of the globe your position relative to the latitude by taking an angle between the sun and the horizon at noontime. That angle gives you a direct correlation between where you are relative to the equator. Longitude, east and west, an entirely different story. For that you need a very accurate clock. And that they didn't have until the late 1700s. The pirates never had one, with the result that they spent a lot of time lost.
But Rogers would not get lost. In the far Pacific, he calls it remote trading posts, established by the Dutch and Portuguese. Intrigued, he recognizes that these are the seeds of empire. Woodes Rogers becomes fired with the idea that England, too, should establish such outposts. On October 11, 1711, after 3 long years, the expedition reaches England. It's the first voyage around the world since Drake. The journey has inspired in Woodes Rogers a new dream. The establishment of a colony near the trading routes of the Atlantic. He decides on the Bahamas. Rogers plans to establish on the islands a ship-shape English colony. There's but one problem. Its only settlement, Nassau, is a pirate stronghold, a shanty town of drinking, whoring, gambling, and fighting. Undaunted, Rogers takes leave of his family in Bristol, this time to become the governor-in-chief of the Bahamas colony.
Captain Woodes Rogers persuaded the king to re-establish the colony out in the Bahamas, and they raised the money, and investors put up the money, and in return, Woodes Rogers said that he would rid the island of pirates.
July 24, 1718. Captain Woodes Rogers' ship arrives just outside the narrow entrance to Nassau Harbor. He sends word ahead that all pirates who promise to cease their evil ways will be pardoned. Almost immediately, Rogers is sent a greeting by the resident pirate, Charles Vane.
I will accept the king's pardon only if I can keep the plunder from a prize I have just brought into Nassau.
Captain Rogers fires off an immediate reply. Charles Vane angrily escapes to sea, vowing he will return and avenge this indignity. Rogers has more immediate dangers to face on shore. The Republic of Rhodes.
There was even a pirate welcoming committee, led by a crazy old souse named Sawney, a former Shakespearean actor The pirates had declared him their governor. His lunatic ranting and raving alternated with eloquent soliloquies. Truth be told, no one could understand a word he said, which is why the pirates thought he made such a fine political leader.
But now, in Woodes Rogers, the pirates, whores, and barkeeps have a real governor.
Well, much to his delight and surprise, I should imagine, he was met with cheers for the king and for himself. Well now, buoyed by this reception, his mouth, as we say in the Bahamas, got a little hard. So he told the pirates, said, this slackness got to stop. Now if you're willing to wake with me, I'll wake with you. But if you're not willing to wake with me, God help you, brother, because he's the only one that can help you.
Rogers is hopeful. In his first week, he puts all able-bodied men to work clearing brush for cane fields and roads. He offers land to new settlers. Then, in a bold move, he picks a former pirate, Ben Hornigold, to become his captain-commander. But for most of the pirates, the prospect of clean, honest living quickly wears thin. Rogers complains in his journal.
For work, they mortally hate it. Thus they live poorly and indolently. Few of them have any opinion of a regular, orderly life under any sort of government, and would rather spend all they have at a punch house.
To make matters worse, Rogers hears that Charles Vane is on his way back to Nassau. Vane has a fleet of captured ships, an army of new recruits, and a burning desire for revenge. Rogers fears for his new colony. He sends his captain-commander, Ben Hornigold, the pirate godfather himself, to stop Charles Vane. Hornigold sets sail. Weeks pass, rumors abound, and there's not a sign of Hornigold.
Not hearing from Captain Hornigold, I was afraid he was either taken by Vane or had returned to his old practice of pirating, which was the general opinion here in his absence.
Finally, Woodes Rogers spies Ben Hornigold's ship coming into Nassau. It is followed by one of Vane's ships. Rogers, captain-commander, has done his duty. Hornigold has driven away Charles Vane, captured one of his ships, and 13 pirates. Good news at last.
I am glad of the new proof Captain Hornigold has given the world to wipe off the infamous name he has hitherto been known by. Now most people speak well of his generosity.
Rogers knew he had to reassert his authority, so he decided against sending the 13 pirates Hornigold captured to Jamaica for trial, as was usual procedure. He was going to try them right here in Nassau among their friends and fellow pirates. Well, the final test came at the sentencing. Rogers never flinched. 9 of the pirates were sentenced to death by hanging. Now, on the day of the executions, hundreds of Nassau's pirates gathered to watch their comrades swing. And I should imagine it had to be in the back of Rogers' mind that this thing could get out of hand.
Will the pirates stand idly by and watch their mates swing from the gallows? Or will they rise up and kill the one man who has been bold enough to stand up to them?
For the pirates, there was always safety in numbers. But Woodes Rogers, standing there alone, simply outnumbered them all. 100 violent cutthroats watched as one by one their mates were strung up. But from the brethren, not a whisper was heard.
As each pirate faces the noose, he confronts his fate in his own fashion.
I ain't gonna die with me shoes on. I ain't.
I just want a bootful of rum so as to ease my journey to hell.
Water would be more useful where we're going.
Rogers has brought peace and stability to the Bahamas at last. And he's poured all of his personal money into the fragile economy. Now, deserted by his investors, he must return to England for a stay in debtor's prison. It will take 8 cold English winters before Rogers' service is recognized by the Crown. Finally, he's granted a small pension and returns with his sons to his beloved islands. Today, the Bahamas are an idyllic resort, a prosperous member of the British Commonwealth. On the very site where Woodes Rogers hanged the last of the pirates stands a monument to the man whose dreams made it all possible. The pirate hunter, Captain Woodes Rogers. For centuries, amidst the ruins of Port Royal, Jamaica, this stone jailhouse has survived. Behind these doors once languished the island's female criminals. Women sentenced to be executed would spend their last days here, perhaps luxuriating in one final bath. Among them, the most notorious of all, Anne Bonny, pirate. She was born in Ireland, out of wedlock to a married lawyer and his scullery maid. Their love affair caused such a scandal that they fled together across the ocean to Charleston, South Carolina. Charleston society is breeding a new aristocracy of merchants and traders. Anne's father becomes one of the richest, and she is educated to be a proper young lady. But she's also a tomboy, learning unladylike things like riding, sailing, shooting, and wielding a cutlass. She often visits the waterfront, and by the time she's 14, falls in love with the docks, the taverns, and inevitably with the pirates. She's a beautiful young woman who takes her pleasures as she chooses and earns a reputation as a slut and a seductress. When Anne announces she's in love with a ne'er-do-well sailor named James Bonny, her father disinherits her and threatens to have her arrested.
To his mates, James Bonny was a shiftless fool, a no-hoper. But love is blind, as they say. Besides, to Anne Bonny, he was her ticket out of a living hell. Charleston society.
So Anne and her new husband depart for New Providence in the Bahamas, well known as the pirate hellhole. The young marrieds build their little nest amidst the taverns, gambling halls, and whorehouses. Monogamy was never an issue for Anne. By 16, she'd enjoyed more men than most, including, rumor has it, old Ben Hornigold, Blackbeard himself, and Stede Bonnet. But only one man captures her imagination, the dashing rogue Jack Rackham, known as Calico Jack. Anne and Jack's romance is torrid and risky because by law, Anne is an adulteress. When Governor Woodes Rogers hears of the illegal relationship, he swears he'll have Anne publicly flogged. That night, Anne Bonny, Calico Jack, and a few old mates sneak aboard a merchant ship. Anne creeps up behind the sailor standing watch and whispers, "I'll blow your brains out if you utter a sound." Quickly, they capture the ship and slip out to sea.
The
sea was a vast unknown world. So many mysterious fates could befall a ship. 'Twas no wonder we were a superstitious lot. Figureheads on the bow kept unfriendly spirits away, and we were always on the lookout for ominous signs. A bucket kicked over, a strange dance by the ship's cat, or a woman aboard ship. Bad luck indeed. Unless, of course, the woman was Anne Bonny.
For the next 6 months, Anne Bonny and Calico Jack cruise the Caribbean, plundering. Anne dresses in men's clothes. She keeps her sex a secret by fighting side by side with Rackham's crew, winning their respect. Then one day they capture a Dutch merchant vessel. On board is a young English sailor named Mark Reed. Rackham wants him to join his crew.
Why, look here, me lad. Sail with me and you'll drink doubloons. But if you won't, God blast me eyes, I'll slit your bone case from top to bottom.
To no one's surprise, Mark Reed joins Rackham's crew. Reed turns out to be a skilled sailor. Anne Bonny finds herself strangely attracted to him. Soon she's making excuses to be on deck whenever he's around. A sense of trust develops between them. One night, Anne decides to reveal to Mark Reed she is a woman. In a jealous rage, Rackham confronts Reed. The sailor replies, "I am no threat to you, Captain Rackham." For Mark Reed is actually Mary Reed. Rackham is shown ample proof.
Like Anne Bonny, Mary Reed, too, was born out of wedlock. To avoid condemnation, her mother disguised her as a boy. She enjoyed the freedom of living as a young man, and she went to sea as a cabin boy.
Bonny and Reed are a brace of hellcats. When the ship swings into action, so do they, howling like banshees through the cannon smoke, wielding cutlass and pistol, and leaving many a brave sailor quaking in fear.
'Twas a violent, dangerous life they led. Aye, but it was a full life as well. A life free to choose their own destiny. A life free from condemnation. No longer would they hear those whispered words. Adulterer, whore, bastard. And if they did amongst present company, 'twas often a compliment.
Mary becomes the only real woman friend Anne has ever known. To their shipmates, they no longer pretend to be men.
When we saw any vessel and gave chase and attacked, they wore men's clothes. At all other times, they wore women's clothes.
Mary Reed falls in love with Tom Dean, a young crewman taken aboard from a captured vessel. She defends him in a fight, startling her victim when she reveals she's a woman. At about this time, Governor Woodes Rogers entices the pirates back to New Providence with pardons. But respectability doesn't suit Calico Jack and Anne Bonny. They return to the sea, and Jack returns to the bottle.
One night on the north coast of Jamaica, as Rackham and his men drank themselves into a stupor, a royal sloop slipped quietly alongside.
Only Mary Reed and Anne Bonny realize they're under attack, and they try in vain to kick the rum-soaked men into action, but the pirates are too drunk to fire back.
They were so soused they could hardly stand up. While the drunken pirates cowered below, only the two women were left to fend off the navy. Anne Bonny yelled to the pirates to come up and fight like men. But they refused, and so she fired her pistol into the whole craven lot of them, killing one, wounding a few more. Ah, that lass. Such a sweet way of persuasion.
1 month after their capture, Jack Rackham and his crew are brought to trial in Spanish Town, Jamaica. Rackham and 8 of his men are quickly found guilty and sentenced to hang. When the women come to trial, it causes a sensation throughout the colonies.
Mary Read and Anne Bonny, spinsters, you are brought to the bar for the charges of murder, piracies, and robberies on the high seas. Charges that you did feloniously and wickedly attack, engage, and take merchant ships in a hostile manner, and put the mariners in corporal fear of their lives.
The 2 women were aboard at the time our schooner was taken. They did not seem kept or detained by force, but served of their own free will and consent.
Each woman had a machete and a pistol in her hands and cursed and swore at the men. The only reason I knew them to be women was by the largeness of their breasts.
The verdict comes quickly.
The court has unanimously found you guilty. You shall be severely hanged by the neck until you are dead. Does the condemned have anything to say that might mitigate their sentence?
"My lord," says Mary Read, "we both plead our bellies, for both Mary and Anne are pregnant, and under English law they cannot be hanged, for the unborn cannot be hanged."
This was one time you can be certain that Mr. Rackham wished that he too was with child. The day he was to hang, he asked to see Anne Bonny. He told her of his undying devotion, and she offered her own sweet words of comfort. "I'm sorry to see you here, Jack," says she, "but if you'd only fought like a man, you need not be hanged like a dog."
Mary Read died in prison at Port Royal with a fever, and her infant died there with her. Anne Bonny was luckier, for she was rescued by a wealthy Charlestonian, a former pirate, who brought her back to Charleston.
Now back in Charleston, they keep a respectful distance from the hellcat who sailed with Calico Jack. And that's just fine with Anne Bonny. Few dare whisper behind her back, and that's fine too. With Woodes Rogers in firm command of the Bahamas, the pirates scatter to the 7 seas. Among them, Edward Teach, a giant of a man, the pirate captain the world will come to know as Blackbeard.
Everything about Blackbeard was magnificent excess. Why wear 1 pistol when you can wear 6? Why have 1 wife when you can have 14? Dressed in black, smoke swirling about his gruesome face, rising from little fires he set in his beard, he wanted his victims to experience one thing: terror.
He plunders from the Caribbean to the Atlantic. His ship of 40 guns boasts a crew of 300. Alarmed, the British dispatch a man-of-war from Barbados to seek and destroy Blackbeard. Spotting the warship, Blackbeard decides he will feign surrender. He holds his fire as the man-of-war draws close. Then suddenly he unleashes a broadside. The battle rages for 3 long hours, ending at last when the crippled British warship limps away in defeat. For Blackbeard, this day marks the beginning of his infamy.
Terror was the favorite weapon of all of the pirates. Bloody flags snapping, skulls and crossbones, scowls, gunfire, roars, and there you were, facing it all.
On his way to plunder the rich ports of the Atlantic, Blackbeard encounters another pirate sloop. He meets with its captain, Major Stede Bonnet. Drawn to a life of adventure, Bonnet has left his comfortable plantation in Barbados and purchased his own pirate ship. His grizzled crew call him the Gentleman Pirate. Like a moth to a flame, Bonnet falls under Blackbeard's spell.
Since you are not used to the fatigue of being captain, it would be better for you to decline it and live in my ship, where you can live the life of a gentleman.
Bonnet accepts. Perhaps he likes the idea of learning from the master. More likely, he's simply been duped out of his own ship. Blackbeard is now captain of Bonnet's vessel and his destiny. Working his way up the Atlantic coast, Blackbeard captures Spanish, English, and colonial vessels. Friends and foes alike are impressed with the discipline and skill among his men.
Blackbeard had his own peculiar way of instilling discipline. Once, while playing cards with his men, he drew out his pistols under the table and blew out the knees of his good friend, the first mate. Why? Well, says Blackbeard, if I didn't shoot one of my men now and then, they'd soon forget who I was.
In May 1718, Blackbeard is ready to stage one of the most brazen acts in pirate history. With Bonnet reluctantly at his side, he'll blockade the port of Charleston. He sends a band of his fiercest-looking cutthroats ashore. They swagger down the streets, shouting blood-curdling threats. 2 days stretch into 4, as Blackbeard trains his cannon on Charleston. At last, the governor pays the ransom. A victorious Blackbeard heads north.
To South Carolina, Blackbeard was a vile and despicable criminal. But to North Carolina, he was a good and generous provider. For its governor was what we called a land pirate. It was they who fenced the booty and kept the lads in gunpowder and rum. More important, it was they who issued pardons. After all, there are pirates, and there are pirates.
Blackbeard sends his protege, Stede Bonnet, to obtain pardons from his old friend, Charles Eaton, governor of North Carolina. When Bonnet returns to the hideout, pardons in hand, he's stunned to find his ship stripped of its valuables. Blackbeard is gone. Gamely, the gentleman pirate puts out to sea. But he is captured. He is tried and sentenced to hang. Major Stede Bonnet, cursed by his liaison with Blackbeard, begs eloquently for mercy.
If you will only allow me to live, I'll separate all my limbs from my body, only reserving my tongue to pray to the Lord my God. Your Honour's most miserable servant, Stede Bonnet.
On December 10, 1718, he is hanged. The body of Stede Bonnet, gentleman pirate, is tossed into the ebbing tide.
Blackbeard happily spent Bonnet's share of the plunder. He retired to Bath and told the locals that he was going to become one of them, even taking a bride, a young Mary Ormond. Building a beautiful house across from the governor's, the pair entertained lavishly. Finally, the loot ran out. Blackbeard, attempting to pimp his lovely young bride, unsuccessfully became restless and returned to sea.
Once again, the legend is on the loose. But this time, there will be no safe harbor for Edward Teach. The governor of Virginia enlists Lieutenant Robert Maynard of the Royal Navy to track him down. Maynard is a modest, quiet man, but as fearless as Blackbeard. He locates Blackbeard's ship, anchored in its favorite spot off Ocracoke Island. The pirates are partying as Maynard's sloops come into view. Roaring drunk, Blackbeard refuses to run. Instead, he fires a deadly volley at the two sloops. When the smoke clears, there's no sign of life on Maynard's deck. Blackbeard roars in triumph.
Our enemies are all knocked on the head. Blast them, butter and cut them to pieces.
But when the pirates board, Maynard and his men come rushing up from below deck where they had been hiding. Maynard fires first. Blood spurts from Blackbeard's chest. Maynard fires again. More monster than man, Blackbeard moves in with his cutlass. But a sailor comes up from behind, and with a single stroke, slashes his neck. Like some great beast, Blackbeard topples forward. Lieutenant Maynard makes this entry in his log.
Saturday, January the 3rd, 1719. Little wind and fine weather this day. The head of Edward Teach, a pirate, I hung under the bowsprit of said sloop in order to present it to the colony of Virginia.
Only this simple passage marks the death of the most famous pirate in history. But he lives on in legend.
On a quiet night on Ocracoke Sound, they say you can hear a lone swimmer. And those who live there think they know who it is. Swimming about, searching for his head. For Blackbeard, even in death, the curtain will never come down.
Back in the early 1700s, East Coasters had a keen interest in shipwrecks. On Cape Cod, they were called mooncussers. They cursed the moon when it was bright, because ships rarely ran aground. Mooncussers would shine lights from rowboats, or hang them on cows to confuse the helmsman. They even had a prayer for the occasion.
We pray thee, O Lord, not that wreck should happen, but that if any shall happen, thou wilt guide them unto our shores for the benefit of the inhabitants.
In 1717, off Wellfleet, Massachusetts, the Mooncussers made a killing off a rich pirate ship, the Widda, broken to pieces on their beach. For 300 years, salvors have searched the world for pirate wrecks, but only one has ever been found. It is the Widda.
This is an example of some of the treasure that we excavated from the Widda. Silver bars, the legendary pieces of 8, and chunks of gold that would have been the minimum share that a pirate would have received. You can even see where a pirate sliced the bar with his dagger to see if the gold were counterfeit.
But the real story of the widow is not about treasure. It's about a broken heart. Sam Bellamy was tall and handsome with thick black hair. He served in the British Navy in the war with Spain and came out of it broke and disillusioned. When he hears that a fleet of Spanish ships has been wrecked off the Florida coast, he leaves England to hunt for treasure. Bellamy stays with relatives in the Cape Cod town of Eastham, Massachusetts, and looks for backing for his hunt. One spring day, he sees a young woman singing under a cherry tree. He introduces himself. She gives him her name freely, Maria Hallett. By day's end, they are lovers. Bellamy shares his dreams of the Spanish treasure. He makes a vow to his new sweetheart. He will bring her back a ship full of riches.
She'll be so laden with gold and silver, she'll need the breath of the gods in every sail to return to you.
He also promises her a wedding ring.
Off the coast of Florida, we find Bellamy looking for treasure, but he's either unable to find the ships or he's found that they've been picked clean. But it's here, this decision, this career move that Bellamy makes. I mean, this really affects us all. I know it's affected me. Bellamy goes on the account. He turns pirate.
I've seen many a man go on the account, but never for the love of a woman. In fact, it was against the pirate code to take a married man, though I know of one sailor who begged to be taken along. "I," says he, "I'd rather risk the noose than sail home to that shrew." Well, I too was a married man, but unlike that rogue, I went home to my wife, though I did take the long way round. It only took some 12.5 years.
In a year, Bellamy plunders 50 ships, trying to build his fortune for Maria. On Cape Cod, Maria is having a harder time. She gives birth to Bellamy's son, and while hiding her illegitimate baby in a barn, he chokes and dies. She's jailed by the Puritan townfolk, then banished as a witch. Maria has become a recluse. She lives in a shack on the dunes. Day after day, she walks the beaches of Wellfleet, searching the horizon for Bellamy's ship. But Bellamy is far away in southern waters and has yet to make the rich strike he promised Maria. In February 1717, Bellamy hears a ship's bell in the distance. He fires a warning shot. Usually 1 or 2 shots bring a quick and bloodless surrender, but this ship races away. The chase is on. Then, after 3 days, the wind shifts. Bellamy has caught his prey. She's called the Widda, after an African bird of paradise.
Perhaps the most fascinating of the Widda treasures is this incredible collection of African jewelry. Prior to being a pirate ship, the Widda was a slaver, and when it was making its way through the Windward Passage, it was captured by Bellamy and its gang.
In a gesture of pirate democracy, Bellamy invites the African slaves to join his crew. He takes the Widda as his own. With a hold full of treasure, Bellamy is ready to return to Maria. Finally, Bellamy's ship is sighted off Cape Cod, just as a dense fog moves in. It was the last time the widow was ever seen.
The weather grew so thick, the crew could not see the shore till they were among the breakers.
A wicked storm beats the ship without mercy. The crew can only pray.
Repent ye, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand.
Bellamy cries out as the surf pounds the ship.
Damn the gods! Damn the devils of the sea!
The widow rolls belly up. Waves choke the cries of the dying men as they descend to their watery grave. In the morning, the wreckage washes ashore. Mooncussers spread the word. A pirate ship is wrecked.
There has been at this wreck 200 men plundering her. Some say they got the riches out of the sand, but I cannot find them as yet. There has also been 58 pirates come ashore dead from the wreck.
Of 146 men on board the Widow, only 2 are known to have made it ashore alive. One of them, a Welsh carpenter by the name of Tom Davis, convinced the judges he had been forced into piracy and was acquitted. The other survivor, a Native American named John Julian, we believe was sold into slavery by the court.
But something else survived. This bell, which we found in 1985, there's a legend that goes along with it that it could be heard as the wreck was being pounded to pieces on an outer sandbar. And you have to wonder whether Maria Hallett could have heard it from her dune shack.
Some say she lived alone in the dunes for the rest of her life. Others say differently.
We've heard a story of this dark stranger that appears at Higgins Tavern in 1717 in the fall. He has a deep cut across his forehead and a streak of white hair running through the middle of his dark mane. Again, he returns to the wreck site in the spring and was seen with Maria Hallett walking across a dune. And after that, Bellamy disappears into history.
Most pirate tales are but simple human stories. Some driven by love, some by bloodlust, still others by dreams. The pirates emerge from the pages of history as rugged individuals who helped shape our destinies. Knights and rebels, heroes and rogues. They appeal to the free spirit that lies deep within our souls. Today, the pirates of old are but whispers on the wind, but the pirate tales will be with us forever.
The lure of the far horizon, the promise of an exciting tomorrow. Freedom from society's rules, and the dream of treasure. There will always be those who answer the call of the running tide. Always be the brethren of the sea.